Despite being published by Bethesda and developed by Rebellion, Rogue Warrior is slated to be one of the worst FPS games to ever hit the shelves, receiving a 2 out of 10 from GameSpot and a 1.5 out of 10 from both Game Informer and IGN. But could the publisher that was riding high off the success of Oblivion and the makers of the famed Sniper Elite series really release such a flop? Well, one of the main complaints is that the story is short, and this is fair. The 2-hour story houses a fictional telling of Richard Marcinko, a real-life Navy SEAL who formed SEAL Team 6 and Red Cell. But despite an autobiography of the same name, Rogue Warrior is a fictional story set in North Korea, and is likely more akin to Richard Marcinko's fictional writings. This translated into a fairly larger-than-life representation of Marcinko that ironically seems to collide with his real leadership style, at least from a typical civilian point of view. Marcinko's journey in this game isn't all that different from a typical Hollywood story of a grizzled elite soldier, albeit with more swearing. It doesn't really do anything that you wouldn't expect, and is an in-and-out game that feels like it's straight from the dollar bin. This is in part due to the length, but also due to the gameplay. You see, Rogue Warrior is a middle-of-the-road first-person shooter at best. At first it feels like it's meant to be more of a stealth game, as it has third-person cover mechanics, but this is kind of where things fall apart. You see, the default pistol and perhaps all the 8 guns I found feel really inconsistent to use. For example, at one point, a pistol was a one-shot to the head, and the next, I had to fire 3 rounds, which blew my cover. Damage and accuracy seem finicky, but this issue is even worse in the third person. While it may have implemented the realistic gimmick of preventing you from peeking above cover when there's an obstacle, such as glass, the crosshairs in third person are a little too far spread for accurate feeling fire, especially at the ranges that you're going to typically engage enemies in. But at least Rogue Warrior does hold up decently visually. Ignoring the issues exclusive to AMD graphics cards, the visuals are fairly standard for 2009. I actually think that the voice acting is fairly decent, but the music and gun sounds are maybe average at best. Ironically, I think some of the best elements of the aesthetics are the North Korean propaganda posters strewn around in some of the environments, so take that as you will. Unfortunately, Rogue Warrior isn't very accessible. While it does have 3 difficulty settings and remappable controls, there are no subtitles and no way to change the language in-game. There's also no controller support and slightly awkward camera transitions that can be a little nauseous to look at times. Rogue Warrior isn't much better in convenience either. While it is available on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, as well as digitally on Steam, the fairly limited system settings are annoying, as they require you to use the arrow keys instead of WASD or your mouse. It's also important to note how poorly this game runs on AMD GPUs. Without a DLL, the experience is choppy with regular frame freezes. With the DLL, it runs smoother at the cost of dropping to the desktop randomly. Unfortunately, this didn't come out on my recording due to the way I set it up, but you have to trust me when I say this happens at the worst times, making this game nearly unplayable towards the end. I later tried it on my Nvidia GPU and didn't have any of these issues, but it's still unacceptable. All in all, Rogue Warrior has a lot wrong with it. I think that the gameplay is okay, and I had a little fun with it. But whatever redeeming qualities it has, wears really thin, and would have received a do not play if I hadn't tested to see if it worked properly on Nvidia GPUs. But even at its best, this game is an easy avoid on the A scale. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Check out my last video on 2004 Sid Meier's Pirates, and consider subscribing. Until then, this has been Rob the Slob, and I'll see you in the virtual commute.